Today we talk about clinchers versus tubulars and a little bit of tubeless thrown in. Hello legends and super legends, welcome to Veloharmony. In today's video, I want to talk about the different kinds of tires that are available on the market today. You've probably heard about tubulars. Over the pond in the UK, they refer to them as tubs. In the US, most people call them sew-ups, but they're called tubular tires. Back in the 19th century, I think it was like 1887, DuPont invented the pneumatic tire to where you could put air in the tire instead of the wooden wheels, that they had back then, and it just caught on, and that's what racers flocked to. The tubular tire has been around. You've probably seen some of the old pictures where the guys would wear tires across their body. That's how they carried their spares. Nowadays, people that use tubulars don't carry them that way. You can fold them up, put them in a bag if you want to on the back of the bike, or you can fold them up and put them in your jersey pocket. They're very, very lightweight, to where you can buy a lighter weight tire, fold it up nice and tight, because you really don't have flats that frequently anyway if you know what you're doing. To where when you do have a flat, you got a tire to get you home. They also have sealants available now that you use for even in tubeless tires that you can use to repair a sew-up or a tubular tire that will get you home, and sometimes you can even get the life of the tire out of it after you put in a repair. But anyway, what I really want to focus on is to introduce the different kinds of tire to those of you who are not familiar, and kind of talk more about who's using them, why they're better or preferred versus the other. So let's start with the tire we all know, the clincher tire. The clincher tire has a particular rim that you have to use that has a bead that's on the tire that needs to latch onto this hook on the rim. So this rim is specifically designed to hold this tire. So the tire is not completely round, the clincher tire. I'm not showing the tube here because you know about it. I want to talk more about the tire itself. So basically, you cannot use a tubular tire on a clincher rim, and you cannot use a clincher tire on a tubular rim, because when you have a tubular tire, you have to have a specific rim. So let me introduce you to the tubular tire. I've got a tubular tire here, and it's on this rim for what we usually do. We stretch the tire, because when you're mounting them, if you're using glue, it can be very messy if you don't stretch the tire. You stretch the tire by inflating it and loading it on a rim, preferably. But you can also stretch a tubular tire by just inflating them and hanging them. So I'm going to go ahead and take the air off because I want to show you the tire and the rim. The tubular tires, you can run, this one I had 140 PSI in it. It's not a very expensive tire. It's made by Continental. It's more of a training tire per se, a lower TPI tire. They've got tubular tires that run upwards of $100 a tire. So that's why when people have a flat, it's kind of like if it's early in the life of the tire, it can be a pain. But now with the sealants I mentioned, that's what a lot of riders are using to extend the life of their tubular tires. So I want to talk more about the practicality of it, or lack thereof, versus clinchers, and talk about what people that use them today, how they're handling them, and why they use them. So this is a tubular tire. I've deflated it. I'm going to take it off the rim. Now, normally it is glued to the rim. This is not glued to the rim. I just put it on there to stretch it. When you're stretching them, you don't glue them. But this is what the rim looks like. I'm going to bring both rims. Let me put the tire over here for now. I'm going to bring both rims so you can see the difference. And hopefully you'll be able to appreciate the difference. If you look at both rims, you can see how this is concave and it's kind of shallow, it has shallow edges. And if you look at this, the concavity is deeper. I can literally put my finger in there inside, and you can see the sides that are meant to hold the tire. You see how much material they've added to this rim. And what's important about this is this material that they've added. If you know anything about rolling resistance and so forth, acceleration on when you're accelerating, the mass on the wheel makes a difference in the responsiveness you get. So one of the positives of running a rim like this one, which is very shallow, it doesn't have any side, to hold. There's nothing for it to hold. The tire just mounts on there. Nowadays, you can even use tape. They have tape that you can put on here and mount the tire and be ready to go like that, because the process of gluing, some manufacturers recommend that you do 3 coats of the glue. They're very light coats. There are multiple topics on how you glue a rim, and if you talk to 20 different people, you get 20 different ways. So I'm not going to go into that in this video, but basically you can see the old glue on this rim here. And usually what you would do is you would put a thin film of glue on your spare tubular, fold it and put it up. We'll get to that in a bit. What I really want to talk about is that these rims, compared to a clincher rim that I showed you, are considerably lighter and more responsive because they have less material on them, whether they're made out of carbon or not. So carbon to carbon, a tubular rim is simply friskier and more responsive. So is the tire, depending on which quality tire you buy, but generally they just ride better. I'm going to read the pros and so forth from a guy's site that I found called The Wind in My Face, and I will put the link in the description for those of you who may want to go there and check it out if you're interested in tubular tires. But I picked his list because it kind of jived with my experience. When I used to race, we used these, because at the time I had somebody who would glue them for me. I don't care for the gluing process. I plan to continue to use tubular tires from time to time, but I will only use them for maybe grand fondos or particular weekend rides that I just feel like I want to enjoy the suppleness and the responsiveness of these tires. Now, I want to talk more about how close Clincher has come over the years. You see that orange bike back there? I don't know if you can see it very well. Let me step aside. I have some Shimano rims on there. They're aluminum and carbon mix, and they've got what Vittoria calls their open tubular tires. It's a clincher tire. They refer to them as open tubular because you get pretty close paired with a latex tube. You get close, but not quite. It gets close. That's about it. Now, it doesn't mean that there aren't clincher combinations, the lower TPI tires that can roll pretty well, but there's something about a tubular tire. When you air it up, it's a round tire because you don't have those sides that are hooked into the rim. So the tire itself is round. So the cornering is more precise and it's more reliable. It's stable. Everything about the ride is unique. And so until you've ridden it, you can't really appreciate it as I talk about it. But what I really want to stress here is that one of the main benefits is that if you're flat on a tubular tire, you're not going to have the problems that you have with clincher where the bead comes out or the bead can pop out. Because remember, the tubes are sewn inside the tire. That's why we call them sew-ups over here. Okay, so you cannot repair them because you would have to remove this tape, open that, repair the tube, stitch it back in there and it's not practical. So nowadays, fortunately for those who are still using tubulars, they have these sealants that I talk about, that you remove the valve core. Most, if not all of the tubulars, the valve core is removable. You remove the valve core, you put the sealant in there, and you roll the tire to where it gets to, depending on the size of the hole. I mean, nowadays they can repair even bigger holes, but you can get the tire repaired. But on the road, practically what you want to do is you can fold these tires. This one is not exactly the lightest weight tire. So if I'm using a spare, I would buy a very lightweight tire to use as a spare that you can really fold down to about the size of a tube. And then what we usually do is we tape it. Some people will fold them like this, a little longer, and then use a toe strap. Back in the day, that was very common when I raced. You'd fold the tire a little longer, tie it like this, use a toe strap and put it under your saddle. And that's where it would stay. So nowadays, most of the people that are using these, they take this and a sealant, and some of them even put it in a bag. They have bag made for tubular tires that are a little longer, they do that. For me, when I do go out with these, I mean, I haven't used them in a long time, but I've been thinking about getting back to using them. I fold them like this and I tape them. You can tape them with blue painter's tape or any kind of tape you have, and just to keep it nice and soft. But before you do that, you have to stretch it like you saw me do. You inflate it so you don't have to struggle and put it on there. And then you put a light glue on it if you're going to use glue. If you're using the double-sided tapes that are on the market now for tubulars, which makes it quicker to mount, you don't have to wait to go through 3 coats of glue. You don't need to glue this. I mean, you don't need to put the glue on it. You just need to go ahead and make sure you pre-stretch it overnight or say, and then you fold this thing up, and this is what you carry. I have a flat, let's say every 1,200 plus miles. It's not that often. So I can go 8 months before I have a flat. It's not that frequent. So it's really better to just cover contingencies than to try to carry the kitchen sink with you. They don't happen that frequently. The goal is to make sure you can get home. So with a sealant now, with these tubulars, it's very, very practical compared to what it used to be back in the day. We ride with a guy who uses them. His name is Robert on Sunday. And one time he had 2 flats in a ride and he had to call for a ride because he didn't have a sealant. If he had had a sealant, he would have been able to remove the valve core, because you can carry one of those small valve core remover tools. Just remove the valve core, put it in there, minute or so, you're ready to go. Definitely want to carry a pump as opposed to a CO2, because just in case you have challenges with it, the pump is actually easier, because you don't want to put too much pressure when you're using sealant out of the gate. Then you spray sealant everywhere. Anyway, I want to come back and focus on pros and cons. 90% of the people out there use clinchers. The reason is that they're less expensive, they're more practical, they're easier to fix, they cost less. You have a puncture with a clincher. What's a tube? Even if you don't patch the tube, a tube is between $6 and maybe $10. Well, a tubular tire, if you don't seal the tire, you're going to be spending, say, $60, $70, depending on the quality of tire you buy. They have tubular tires for around $30 now, which is the one I was using on the display that you could use. But for the most part, think about it. If every time you had a flat, you were replacing your tire, which you would do with a tubular normally, it adds up. So with the sealant now, that's not the case. For most flats that you're going to have, you can bring that tubular tire home and you can seal it if you chose to. So a lot of the guys today that are using tubulars, there are diehards out there. It's a niche market other than outside of the pro peloton, because most of the pro peloton, they use tubulars for the benefits I'm going to read here. Let me read through these and then we'll wrap this up. I found this on a site called My Face in the Wind. I will put the link in the description if you want to go check out his site. He says, why I ride tubular tires exclusively. He says, I ride tubular, quote, sew-up tires exclusively. A tubular tire has a built-in latex, not butyl inner tube. They are expensive, the ones he buys. He says they're $100 up per tire for the ones he rides. They must be glued on and they require a tubular wheel. I'm going to add to that must be glued on, meaning you have the option now to use tubular double-sided rim tape. That is a quicker process than glue. The gluing process takes several days. You can't just glue a tire and go ride right away. The alternatives, he says, are tubeless tires, which is relatively new, we know that, and clinchers, which 99% of the riders use. He carries a pre-glued spare, which is what I talked about. He uses the brand Veloflex Record. He keeps it under his seat. And then he said in the field, he can just swap tires if he has a flat and then ride home. And you got to do that carefully, because once you swap the tire, the bonding of the glue is not as intense as when you properly glue a tire. So you can't be cornering drastically when you replace a tire. Okay. Then he carries a tire sealant. So his reason for riding tubular tires, he says, are multiple and they're compelling in that, first of all, number one, he gets outstanding ride quality, handling, and comfort. There's low weight where it counts, the outer part of the wheel. That's why I was talking about that hook area for the bead of the tire, both for the wheel rim and the tire. The difference can be as much as half a pound per wheel, which makes an enormous difference in feel and acceleration. Safety. What he means is he's immune from the extremely dangerous rim blowouts that can pop clincher tires off the rim. I've never experienced that, but he has. But I've known people who have gone through that. A lot of times that can happen where there's too much heat, like on a long descent, and you're braking a lot. You can generate a lot of heat. Now, what he says is, while tubular tires can blow out suddenly, this requires a nasty foreign object to slice through the tire. And of course, the tubular, if it's glued on properly, it will not roll off the rim. But if it's improperly glued, it can roll off the rim. I've never had that problem with it. He has his gluing done by a bike shop in California. He prefers to drop it off because it is an involved task. Okay. Then he says the third reason he does it is more safety. He said even if a tubular tire were to flat suddenly, the tire is glued on and it tends to flatten over the edge of the rim. So you just imagine it just gets wider than the rim and the rim just sits in the tire. Okay. So because it flattens over the edge of the rim, it gives the rider a fighting chance to avoid a crash because of the sudden blowout. No such deal with a conventional clincher. Yeah, those clincher tires, once they flatten out, they're like paper. He says flat resistance is another reason. About 80% of the time, a cut or a puncture results in a tubular tire retaining enough pressure to get home. What he's saying is 40 plus PSI, because the latex inner tube is resistant to leaking beyond a certain pressure. By comparison, clinchers with butyl tubes just go completely flat. Then he says flats is another reason. He says even when a tire goes completely flat, 9 times out of 10, he can add a half bottle of the sealant I talked about. He uses Stans. They have other brands. He says so it takes about 20 grams of fluid, and then after adding it, he can get the life of that tire, depending on the severity of the cut, he can use that tire for the life of the tire most times. So that's something new. Back in the day when I was racing, we didn't have these sealants. So you basically had to get a new tire. Okay. Now he says, worst case scenario, I can peel off the tire, install a pre-glued spare, inflate, and ride home. Then he states, I will never return to conventional clinchers. He says pavement hurts when your body undergoes friction on the pavement from a sudden blowout, and it's a deadly risk when riding a steep downhill. For safety issues, the low weight and the ride quality, they're compelling enough for me to stick with tubeless. He says, I have not tried tubeless road bike tires, but they are not risk-free, and I've had tubeless mountain bike tires blown off the rims. No thanks. Okay, I'm not going to spend too much time talking about tubeless right now. They're relatively new. They're getting better. They're just harder to mount, so it's a whole different technology if you want to try them. But I think eventually they may get to where they're going to be a comparable choice. Now, what I want to stress here is that people who ride tubulars are really diehard, because once you try it, you're sold. I raced on them because at the time I wasn't buying my own tires. They were very practical. We didn't have the sealants that they have today. That's the reason why I'm going back to them to try to start using them on some big rides or whatever, because I can tell you, I'm yet to find a comparable feel that I had when I raced tubulars on any of the open tubulars like I showed you on that bike, or the 4000S and so forth. They just don't feel the same. So this is just to introduce you to what we call sew-ups in the US. The official name are tubeless tire because they're basically, they're stitched. The tire, when you pump it up, is completely round. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to pump it up so you can see what it looks like. And this is what leads to the characteristics that those who really love these enjoy. It's a Presta valve like everything else. I'm going to just air it up a bit. They have them that some of them will ride at 220 psi. I mean, if you're on a velodrome or a very smooth surface, fine. I'm just going to pump it up a little bit so you can see the shape. That's the inside. So that would basically be on the rim. So the tire would be like this. But you can see the tire is completely round. Okay. So what we do is when you buy a new tubular tire, you air it up, you hang it. You get, air it up close to maximum. This one, they said 140 because it's a relatively inexpensive tubular here. But you air it up, you hang it up so it's easier and more pliable when you're ready to glue and mount. You don't want to take a tire out of the bag to glue because you can get glue all on the side of your rim. It's just more cleanup when you're done. If you're using tape, same thing. You want to stretch this a little bit too. So it's better to plan and prepare. The pro teams in the tour, they'll take up to 4 to 5 days to get these things ready, but they stagger them, start getting them ready and they hang them. You can't just, they don't use tape. A lot of, the diehard, they use glue because this thing bonds. And basically you would put the glue on this white thing here, but I'm not going to talk about that process so much. I wanted to introduce those of you who are not familiar with tubular tires. This is what they are. The tube's in there. You can't see it because of this tape. It's been stitched and that tape is over the stitching that seals it. And this is what goes on the rim. So basically you would take the rim like this and you just put enough air in there to kind of get the form to start, and you go to the valve hole, slide that in. This is already pre-stretched, so it's kind of easy to get on there. But basically, you just kind of roll the tire on the rim. There would be glue. You would basically put glue on the rim first. Some people do 3 coats. Some people do more. Some people do 1. I mean, they do different coats. But basically, what you would do is put that on there. The glue on the tire needs to be on the tape, and this will bond. And then what you do is once the tire gets on there, you go around and you line it up so you can get that tape lined up with the rim like that. So you can see the equal amount of tape. You want to line it up and even it out. Doesn't take long to do. Okay. But I'm not going to do that here. So now these guys are not going to replace the popularity of clincher tires for the practical reasons that I talked about, as far as it's inexpensive, quick to fix. You can just fix the tube. You don't have to replace your tire all the time. But these are more for people who have experienced them and want that little edge, the performance, the ride quality, the things that I read on here. So this is just an introduction to let you know what's out there so that you know now what those guys used to carry around their bodies. They would air these down and carry them around their body, basically crisscross around their bodies back in the day. We don't carry them like that anymore, but people carry them in different ways. But nowadays, really, if you're considering using these just for the experience, you definitely have to get a special rim because they only mount on rims designed for tubular tires. Okay, the clincher tires are here to stay, but people who do cyclocross primarily use tubular tires because they can run lower pressures. They don't have to worry about pinch flats. I don't know if I mentioned that or not. They don't have to worry about pinch flats because the tire deforms uniformly over strange objects. Like if you go over a 2x4 in a tubular tire, you're not going to get a pinch flat versus a clincher tire because the tire rolls over obstacles, and that's where you get that comfort that he talked about, the handling and all of that. Since the form of the tire is completely round, it just behaves better on the road. The rims are lighter because they don't have all that extra material added to them. So people who are using these are pretty much committed. They require a little extra know-how on how to, handle them and know when to back off when you're when you have repaired a tubular tire with less glue on the tire, because once you take one off, and sometimes they're very hard to get off the tire if they're bonded really hard. What I do with tape, when I use tape, is that near the valve hole, I leave a little section, especially near the nipple where the valve goes in. I leave a little section where I can start to peel off the tire easily after a puncture. I don't make you don't put the tape completely around on top of each other. You need to leave an opening so you can get that tire off when you do have a flat. And I talk about the flat so much, but it don't happen that often. Even on clinchers, every now and then you have a flat, or you might have a ride where you have one or two and so forth. But with these tires, if you have a sealant, you're good to go. Most of the time, you just pop a sealant in there nowadays, and it will just seal the tire. You can just keep riding, and you get. I don't recommend using a sealant before you get a flat, because it just adds considerably weight, a lot of weight to the tire, and it just changes the characteristic and the handling of the tire unnecessarily. So only add a sealant when you're repairing the tire, you know. And then you just have to shop for the tire that falls in your budget as far as the range, because they got tires from $30 and up, you know, to 100 and something, depending on what you're using them for. Most riders will use these for their bigger rides. Some riders ride on tubulars all the time, but even then, they have less expensive tubulars for training on their tubular training wheels. And then they have the very expensive tubulars, the soft cotton ones, for their event wheels. So I hope this helps those of you who are not familiar with what tubular tires are, but these are what started everything. Back in the day, that's what they are. And they have come a long way, and the technology has improved, and they're still around. As I mentioned, cyclocross, that's what you want, because you can put low PSI in there for the mud and the other stuff those guys go through. They use pretty much tubular tires. You don't want clinchers in cyclocross, because pinch flats will just ruin your event. Okay, so I hope this gives you some information that you didn't have before. To that effect, let nothing stop you from getting your K's in.